Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see so many faces gathered here for this event. I'm just going to share a brief welcome on behalf of the court. As Cynthia said, my name is Kimberly Evanson. I'm a district judge here in the Western District of Washington. And on behalf of Chief Judge Estudillo and the other members of the court, it's my honor and privilege to welcome you to today's celebration of Women's History Month, and specifically this panel, Voices from History. I do want to thank the M3 Federal Bar Association, the Ninth Circuit Historical Society, and Perkins Coie for hosting us so generously this evening. The stories we will hear tonight from women who walked into courtrooms and law offices when very few other women did. Those stories are not abstract history. They're a living memory, and they're the reason that events like this can happen. I want to give you a little bit of context from my very little narrow view of the Western District of Washington to put this event in some historical context, since we're talking about history. The first judge of the Western District of Washington was appointed in 1905. Over the course of the next 120 years, 3 women would be appointed to the district court. That's District Judge Barbara Rothstein, Marcia Peckman, and the late Carolyn Dimmick, who just passed away in January, and who served on both the state Supreme Court and the federal bench. So over the course of 120 years, there were 3 women who were appointed as district judges. Now, that is not true of our magistrate judges. Our magistrate judges, I believe, have been majority female, and right now are 50-50 in the court. But then in 2021 to 2023, 4 women were appointed as district judges to the Western District of Washington. So in the span of just a few years, the women on the bench exceeded the entire history of the court over the course of just those 2 years. So for the first time in history, our court has 4 active female district judges serving simultaneously. So that progress is worth celebrating, but so is this. Our state Supreme Court has been majority women for over 20 years. And as I said, our magistrate judges have had significant female representation for also about 20 years. So while the federal district court bench, again, that little narrow window from which I'm looking, has only just begun to reflect the full range of the state's talent and leadership, our Supreme Court has been showing us what that looks like for decades. So together, those numbers give us a little thought about how far we've come and how progress was never inevitable. But it is the result of women like the ones we will hear from on this panel who pushed open those doors and who refused to close them again. The women you're going to hear from tonight started their careers when leadership and positions in law were few and far between. And what they navigated and what they built made that path wider for everyone who followed, myself included. We are grateful for their voices and really honored to hear from them. So without further ado, I welcome you on behalf of the court and would like to welcome Katie O'Sullivan of Perkins Coie to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Judge Evanson, and thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful turnout, and on behalf of Perkins Coie, we're delighted to host everyone and show off our still newish offices with their fabulous view. Thank you to the panelists for coming and for being willing to be video recorded. We are recording this for history, and the Ninth Circuit Historical Society will publish this and allow it to be viewed by many others over time. So what a wonderful panel. I won't do one of these super long introductions, but just some fun facts collectively. You have here over 200 years of legal. That was not meant to make them feel badly, but I'm sure it had that effect. This is also a group that didn't take no for an answer. Whether that's losing a judicial election, there's someone up here, that's the case. Whether maybe losing, maybe winning, ultimately ended up winning, thanks to some fabulous work done by people here in the room. We have that. We have someone who survived an avalanche. Didn't accept, take no for an answer there, and others. But you know Governor Gregoire, you may not know, she started her career as an assistant attorney general, came up through that way, government service. We have former Justice Faith Ireland, who came up in a solo practice, doing all kinds of things, family law, personal injury, criminal defense, and served on the trial court for serving on the Washington Supreme Court. And we have here someone in private practice, Judy Runstead, who had more than 45 years in Foster Garvey, I'm told, in real estate and land use development and really reshaping downtown Seattle. What we see here might not have been the case in downtown Seattle without her efforts, and also government service as well. She asked, am I really honorable? Said HON on the invite, and the answer is indisputably yes. She's, in fact, the former chair of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank. Judge McEwen, I won't go on and on, but she is judge, mentor, traveler, author, friend. And my latest fun fact about her, she's in a book club. Many of us are in book clubs. She's in a book club in a women's prison, and that's a regular thing that she does. Remarkable. With that, I'll give you the panel.
Great. Thank you. We have a couple hundred years of experience, apparently. That was meant to make us feel a little old, because the 19th Amendment's like only just a little over 100 years old, so not quite as old as we are. During COVID, I was looking for something fun to do because I was trapped in my house, and I learned that the suffragettes actually published cookbooks. So I thought, well, that would be a good idea to publish a cookbook, which we did, and we really did that originally through the American Bar Association, and now the Ninth Circuit Historical Society is taking that over. And there's a lot of fun recipes in there. There's one from Justice Ginsburg. She did not cook, but her husband Marty was a fantastic cook. There's one from Justice Breyer. Justice Gorsuch submitted a green chili recipe. So there's a lot of fun recipes in there. So I'm going to bring you these women to talk about what it was like in the 70s. Many of you not yet born, apparently. President Nixon had just resigned in that period. Saturday Night Live previewed. But here's the interesting thing. They don't have statistics at the Washington State Bar on how many women members, but I can tell you this, that for a woman admitted in 1970, only one of the women admitted was able and stayed as a member of the bar for 50 years. So there were so few, they didn't even bother to count, basically. So I'm going to just start off. I'm not going to use honorable or governor and that sort of thing, because I know these women for many years. So I'll take the privilege of using your first name, and I'm going to talk with you, Judy, and just give us some sense of an experience that brought home being a woman in the law practice that long ago.
Oh, wow. Well, some of my favorite stories actually are about some of the people here. And I have to tell you my Margaret McEwen story. I'll probably get it all screwed up, but her first day in court, she walks in, she's got her Dress for Success suit on, and she's all ready to launch forth with her argument. The judge walks in, all rise, everybody rises, everybody sits back down, and then the judge looks over, and he looks over at the opposing counsel, and he looks over at Margaret, and he looks back at opposing counsel, and he says, well, counselor, I guess you win. Counsel for the opposing side didn't show up. Meaning you were sort of this little invisible, I don't know what you were supposed to be, a bailiff or something, I don't know, whatever. That's just one of my very favorite stories of what it was like, you know, to practice when we all started practicing. Well, when I hear that this is historic, I get it now. Every time I go to my doctor, we talk about historic preservation, and I realize she's talking about me. So when I took the bar exam in 1974, I have to say there were a third of our class at the UW Law School was composed of women. I don't think very many of us lasted. I haven't taken account, but I think quite a few people dropped out along the line. But the people you see here at this table are the survivors. Let me just give you a couple of vignettes. One that I will never forget. I was interviewing for one of the law firms that I really wanted to go to work for because I was very, very interested in real estate, construction, and they had a huge construction practice, and they wined and dined me, and we had a great time. And then we got all the way through lunch, and one of them said, but, we will not be able to make you an offer. And, this is really strange. Why would they waste all this time? Maybe they were on an expense account, I guess. But anyway, they said, yeah, we have a lot of contractors, our clients, and, they swear a lot. They use a lot of really foul language, and we just don't think a woman could handle that. I'll never forget what my response should have been. But since this is being recorded, I won't give it for you. But at any rate, it was just, it was those constant little things that happened all the time that we didn't have any laws to protect us then. We didn't have anything. So you just sort of blundered through and you made your way. And in some ways, I think we were stronger because of it. The other thing you had to do was retain your sense of humor. Otherwise, it could have really bogged you down. But yeah, I've got lots of war stories, but I want to hear some of the others.
Finally, there was a very prestigious firm here, Foster Pepper, that did make an offer where Judy was a partner, and so a very successful partner there before going now at Wright Runstead in the real estate practice. So let me ask you, Faith, give us an example of what happened in those early years.
Well, I graduated from law school in 1969. I went to Willamette Law School because UW waitlisted me. So I went to Willamette, where I was one of two women in my class in law school when I graduated. It was a very isolating situation, being just one of two. And she and I were not really supposed to talk to each other. So the only time we really got to talk was in the ladies' room.
But there was a ladies' room. That's the good news,
Well,
right?
actually, when I was first there, I went across the street to the Supreme Court to use the restroom because I didn't know where the ladies' room was. And there was only one, and you had to kind of go sideways through the library to get to it. But the next year, our new law school was opened, and we did have a ladies' restroom with more than one opportunity. So when I graduated from law school, I was a nervous wreck about the bar exam. And I ended up flunking it by 2 points. So, this was really devastating to me. I was just sure that, I would have no friends. My family would disown me. Guess what? They didn't. And so 6 months later, when I had passed the bar, nobody started liking me that didn't like me before. So that was an important lesson to get out of that. And so then when I went to look for a job, I answered an ad for somebody looking for a trial associate. And I called and I spoke to the man, and he said, "Why, do you think a woman could handle the rigors of trial practice?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think so." And I started to talk. He did not invite me for an interview. Fortunately for me, the next ad that I answered was for a small firm in the University District where the senior partner was sort of the mayor of the University District, if you will. And in my initial conversation with me, he said, "Well, I'd ask you what you're going to be doing 5 or 10 years from now, but you're going to be a judge." And I thought, how could he have come up with that? That's crazy. Well, of course, he was right. So I never knew whether he planted the seed or saw something in me that I didn't see. But either way, it worked out very well.
So, Chris, let me ask you. I might say that back then, apparently people weren't too shy about telling us. I interviewed for a firm here in Seattle that said, "Well, we don't hire women." I said, "Well, what am I interviewing for then?" things have gotten a little more sophisticated now, and people may think that, but they don't quite say it out loud in the same way. Anyway, Chris.
Well, the one that I remember, well, I was one of 12 in my law school class. This is Spokane. You'll get the point in just a moment when I emphasize again, this is Spokane. And I was a Rule 9, and we went to court, and a fairly elderly gentleman was on the other side, and he asked if we could go into chambers, and the judge said yes. I was quite excited, because I didn't know what happened back there, and I thought, yay, what are we going to talk about? So the judge called on the gentleman, to which he began by saying, I'm sure she graduated from college. I'm sure she's probably going to law school, and I'm sure she's probably a nice person, but this is no place for a woman to be. Judge turned to me and said, and do you have a comment? I said, yes, let the trial begin. So we go in, and I was so irritated, I probably didn't handle it as well as I could have. But this guy had forgotten everything about civil practice, I swear, and had just gotten along, in trial. And there wasn't a moment where I didn't object to something, and he couldn't find his way out of it. So finally, the judge called me up and said, okay, do you think you could forgive him for just the rest of this trial? So
I'm sure you won, right?
I did. I absolutely did.
Of course she would. Well, those were the days when you would go to court, and then you'd see opposing counsel would be walking out of the judge's chambers. And you'd think, what goes on in there? Well, whatever it is, it's not me that's going on in there. Of course, they didn't invite you in. So let me ask you, Faith, what strategies did you use to kind of move ahead, move past it, and keep going?
Well, the first and most significant was that I dressed to the nines, including wearing hats.
A big hat.
Big hat, and so on. So years later, when they did a profile of me, they showed me in that hat. Well, by then it was, I didn't need to wear the hat, but I wore the dress with the matching coat and the hat. And when I was in the courthouse, nobody handed me the papers thinking I could take them to the clerk's office. And that was my secret. And that really worked very well.
Speaking of clothes, I have to share one other story. And it was, I think, Judge Barbara Durham, I think. And I didn't spend a lot of time in court because mostly my practice was in front of planning commissions and all that. But anyway, so I was in court and I was arguing my case, and she had just ruled in my favor, and I was quite puffed up. And I went out into the corridor, and all of a sudden her clerk came running out the door. And she said, excuse me. And I thought, oh my God, she's changed her mind. I didn't file something the right way. She says, the judge wants to know where you got that suit. That was one of my better moments.
Well, that validates my story with Justice then Judge Durham. Is I had a case in the Washington Supreme Court, and I thought, I am so tired of these navy blue suits that I should get something like Faith wore, like a big hat or a big suit. So I was down in Nordstrom's, and who should I run into but Judge Durham, who was newly on to the federal district court. And since she'd come from the Supreme Court, I thought, well, I'd ask her some advice. And I had a purple jacket and a red and a this and a that. And so I say, excuse me, Judge Durham, but I need a little counseling. So I'd hold up one, and she'd be going in her way, the navy blue. So anyway, that was the fashion advice that I got from.
And that's what you wore the next
And
time.
that's what I wore when I went both to the district court and to the state Supreme Court. But one of the things we often talk about is the importance of mentors, supervisors, family. Like, who made a difference in your career? Because hanging out there by yourself was not a strategy for success.
Well, I have two very clear mentors. They were both men, because let's face it was mostly men out there in the world. The first one was Norm Mailing, who, of course, Chris ran against. And he was the head of the civil division, the prosecuting attorney's office, and he gave me so much responsibility. He allowed me to go in and argue the case as to whether or not the King Dome should be approved. So I got to handle that case, and he just took me through everything I needed to know and gave me enormous responsibility. The other one was Tom Foster at Foster Pepper. So I'll never forget when a client came to him, and it was a significant client, and said, we've got this huge project and we want you, your best land use real estate attorney. And Tom hauled me out, brought me in, and then Tom talked to me a little later, and he said, the client says that he does not want a woman on this case. And Tom went to that client and said, I think you need to take your business elsewhere. Yeah. So it's not only the mentoring, it's the standing up for and being in their corner when they need it. Critically important, and those two instances stick in my mind.
What about you, Faith?
Well, what about you? No story.
Who's asking the questions? You're not on the state Supreme Court anymore.
She's the judge.
Yeah. You go first.
Okay, but the federal court should go first. But yeah, I had some mentors. I mentioned the mentor from University District. But about 3 months after I was on the court, they sent me to my first Washington State Bar Association meeting, which was in Vancouver. And I had to hear this one guy who was going to talk about how to make money handling wrongful death cases. Because back in those days, we didn't talk about making money as lawyers. So I thought, I got to know what this guy has to say. So I'm sitting in the front row wearing a short skirt, which was popular in the 70s. And he's up on the podium, and I'm thinking, how can I get to know this guy? He's looking down at me, seeing the chick in the front row, and he's going, I'm going to have lunch with her. So he became my mentor, and maybe a little more than that for a brief period of time. But anyway, when that time ended, he said to me, well, when I think you're ready to get married, I will pick your husband for you. So he did. We were all skiing in Utah, and he met this guy that I was dating, and he met this guy who was a dentist that I was dating. And at the end of the week, he says, "Get rid of the dentist, marry this guy." And I looked at him. I said, "But he's 8 years younger than me, and he's something called a programmer." We've been married 64 years. 64 years now. 65.
Well, you mentioned the Washington State Bar, and I do recall one event where I was speaking with a woman named Melanie Rowland, and we had both helped found the statewide Washington Women Lawyers, and the guy was very sing-song. And this is Melanie Rowland. I mean, she had a resume that put us all to shame. University of Pennsylvania, law review, clerkships, you name it. And then he said, I'm sure she's quite well qualified, but she can also bring some coffee to us as well. And even the audience was taken aback by that. And that then resulted in the State Bar adopting a few guidelines that some moderators might use when they were moderating, not just women, but others. What about you, Chris?
I think I've been very blessed to have people who've been there for me, supported me. But one guy stands out in my mind, and that's a guy who, when I first began my employment with the Attorney General's office, was what we call the chief deputy, a guy named Ed Mackey. And he was and I was in Spokane, he was in Olympia, and he was as supportive as can be. Because it was challenging back in that day. Clients saying, don't you have a guy, and all that sort of thing. But in the end, what he did for me is, with less than, not that I would do this, I have to admit, but less than 5 years of practice, he gave me my first United States Supreme Court case to argue. Again, I wouldn't do that with one of my lawyers, but it was an amazing experience. I did, however, admittedly, when I watched the Chief Justice destroy, it was a First Amendment obscenity case, the lawyer on the other side who was something else, all I could think to myself is, beam me up, Scotty, I should not be here. But then he turned around, and I don't know that any of you would know a comparable worth case. Have you ever heard of a comparable worth case? State of Washington was unique, ended up in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was an action that was brought by the Washington State employees against the state of Washington, saying there was discrimination based on comparable pay for comparable work, not equal, comparable. And again, I was selected to be the lead lawyer on that case, argued it in the Ninth Circuit and so on. Ultimately, the governor settled the case because he wanted to have that implemented in the state, though had it gone to the Supreme Court, I think the state would have won. It was ugly for me because on the one hand, when we lost at trial, and we knew we would, the Attorney General, and particularly Ed Mackey, got all kinds of calls about how I had thrown the case because I was a female. And then when we won in the Ninth Circuit, all kinds of, why did you put an unqualified female up there to argue this case? So, I mean, it was kind of a no-win for me, but I did my job. But he always supported me, believed in me, was there whenever things got tough and got down. So I'm with each of you. It takes somebody who would uniquely stand up and say, we're going to do the right thing no matter what. And we'll tough our way through those who think we're not qualified. So I thank Ed for all the chance he gave me.
Well, I think it's important, you know, that you have some supervisor or mentor. We hear about it all the time, and I'm a big believer in the sort of lift down and lift up and not sort of just for yourself. I was fortunate at Perkins. I had a supervisor named Ted Collins, recently deceased, and he was from the training school of sink or swim. So it kind of went like this: go do this trial, go do this argument, go do this. But he believed in you. And then later, he became general counsel to the Boeing Company, and he turned back to me as really a chief litigator. And I think we could all see that having these mentors was so important. There were so few people that were willing to spend time with you and talk with you. So any little morsel we could get. Now there's a lot more sophisticated programs. There's, you know, law firms have training programs that send you to exotic places and that sort of thing. But, you know, back then that wasn't the case. But I think it was really, really important to have someone who believed in you. And I think that's what everybody has talked about here. Now, Judy, you went to what would, I guess, be called a medium or a large firm, really, which was unusual for women, even though you had quite a few in your law school class, but not at your law firm at the time. So what was that like arriving on the scene?
Oh, wow.
Other than, of course, Tom Foster, lucky you.
Yeah, great. He was such a great mentor. It was a fairly large firm for that time. I think there were like 35 or something. And there was only one woman, and she was what we called a permanent associate, which is different than today. Today, we have that role for people who don't want to step into that next level of practice. But it was, you know, there was the typical latch. You know, let's just say there were the lechers that you had to kind of avoid, and you sort of figured that out. It was weird. All I can say is it was just weird. I mean, I was the only woman in the firm. I did have my second year, actually Perkins attorney, Ann Redmond, came in, and then it was fun to have somebody there. But you know, it was such a man's world. All my clients were men. Everybody, and so you just kind of rolled with it. It sounds a little feeble to say that today, but it wasn't until later in my career that one of the things that I'm most proud of was starting a formal women's program at Foster Pepper, because I realized I had never had that. And because I wanted it to be fun, we called it Wine, Women, and What's Happening. So we drank a lot of wine, and we brought in speakers. But what I realized was that all of a sudden, we had women clients. So then we were able to put together these events where women clients would come in and with our female attorneys, and they could see other women out there in the business world doing, doing great things. And so it was later in my life that I think I was able to actually take that experience and use it in a positive fashion, as just opposed to just going home every night saying, I'll get through this one way or the other. So trying to turn that experience into something that was useful for our younger women attorneys, I think was the only way that I knew to cope with it. It was just a very different world. Very, very different. 50 years.
50 years. Well, you also underscore that the law is a service profession, which we forget about, and there's some real value in that. You're not actually competing with the CEO, whomever she or he may be. You are a service profession, and we have to remember that. Right. Now, you started in a different situation where every client was a service client because you were a sole practitioner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how did you structure all that? You were the chief cook and bottle washer of the whole place.
Right. I wanted to be closer to the courthouse than the University District, and two other lawyers who were around the same time as I did wanted to open office in the new Pioneer Square building that had all been redone. And I wasn't too sure about their ethics, so I said, why don't we share offices? So I was a solo practitioner, and they had a partnership. And so for me, it was all about just stepping up and getting it done. And I had a very effective secretary. I would dictate into my, it was before cell phones, so I'd dictate into my microphone, and then that's how I kept track of my time, And so mostly it was I just did it. I would look at the cases, I'd analyze them. I got a lot of referrals from male lawyers, and I had one woman come to me, and she said that she had been to 5 lawyers, and they had told her that she didn't have a case. Her husband was driving in, and she was riding out on her motorcycle, and there was a curve in the road, and he hit her, and she ended up losing her leg from the knee down, and their insurance would not cover her because they were 2 people in the same family. So I said, well, I looked at the statute and I looked at the policy, and I said, well, they're perfectly correct. You couldn't win this at the trial court level, but if you want to go to the Supreme Court, I'll take your case. And she agreed to do that. And so, about 3 years later, we had a case called Wiscombe versus whatever insurance company it was that changed it and said that insurance companies could not exclude people just because they were in the same household from the insurance that they had paid for on both vehicles. And so that was reconsidered. And then Tom Chambers, an attorney that I knew, who ended up joining me on the Supreme Court, he joined me to argue it when they reconsidered, and we got an even bigger verdict that time. So that was what my career was like.
Yeah, it's an amazing career. Judy mentioned humor, which is important, I think. And it's also clear in listening to our women of history that you have to pick your battles. Know the old country western song about you got to know when to hold them, got to know when to fold them, got to know when to walk away, got to know when to run. Yeah. Well, speaking of running.
That was good. That was good.
Governor Gregoire, okay, you went right into public service with the state AG, and Slade Gorton, and we all remember, former Attorney General, of course, and Senator, was the AG. So what motivated you to go right into public service, and then you stayed there? Were you kind of thinking of actually running for something?
No. But, so I was law clerk for the Attorney General's office in Spokane. And you got to, I mean, you can't, but back in that day, the Attorney General calls me when I'm about to begin the process of finding a job upon graduation and said, we'd like to offer you a job as an Assistant Attorney General. Well, in that day, you did not turn that down when the AG himself called you. But remember where, again, to the story of him in Spokane. And I do not recall, I recall one of the 12 that got a job in the private sector. If you've ever read about the beginnings of Sandra Day O'Connor, that is symbolic of it. But there's a story behind being hired in the Attorney General's office that most people, I don't think, know about Slade Gordon. Slade was exceedingly bright and very strategic. And he concluded that those women who were in law school back in that day were probably hardworking, bright, and more often than not close to the top of their class. Therefore, the private sector wasn't giving them a job. He would make sure the Attorney General's office was the place they came to practice law. And it was true. That's how I got the job offer from Slade. That was his philosophy. The AG at the time had more women attorneys than any, not that that was that many, but more than any place else in the state of Washington. And it was because he just believed they were there, let's give them a chance. And Sandra Day O'Connor began by something very similar. So my hat goes off to these two who began in the private sector in a day and a time when that just was not where you began your career as an attorney. And I feel very fortunate, quite frankly, that the AG's office gave me that shot. I never thought I would ever run for office. And when I ran for Attorney General, I had never run from anything before, other than high school. I had never run for anything before, which you don't do, by the way, P.S., in case you think you do, you don't do that. I was too naive to understand that. But what happened was, because of the chances that I was given in the Attorney General's office by Ed Mackey and so on, to take the comparable worth case, to do some other cases, then the governor came to me, then Governor Booth Gardner, and asked if I would serve as the head of the Department of Ecology. I served in that role for 4 years. Then he came to me and said, will you run for Attorney General? So it was opportunities at my door, quite frankly, but they began in Spokane, Washington, with Slade Gordon believing that you ought to hire women into the Attorney General's office because the private sector wasn't doing so.
And that was true of others. Chris Bailey, longtime King County prosecutor, realized he could go to Harvard and he could pick off the best candidates, men and women, to get them into, the private sector. So you ran your first election, Attorney General, and you won. But she ran against a very well-known, longtime prosecutor, Norm Mailing, very well loved, but not as loved as Chris Gregoire. So, that was a big risk. And then you ran for governor. Okay, so this is where I'm always kind of in awe, is you faced at that point a gentleman who is very well-known, very well-respected, named Dino Rossi. And you'll tell me, but I think in the end, after a recount, you won by less than 130 votes. Is that about right?
Well, after the second recount, I don't know if you are familiar with how this works. If you're that close, there's an automatic machine recount. If you're that close again, then the prerogative is left to the candidate to require a hand count. We had a hand count, and in the hand count, I was ahead by 128. The suit was then filed to change that, and thanks to some folks here, that went strategically to Chelan County to decide whether the election should be thrown out and we should have a new election. One of the theories but you will love, of their case was that those who were not legally eligible to vote, i.e. had never gotten their rights restored because they'd been in prison, had voted, and therefore those votes should be thrown out and we need to have a new election. I thought to myself, I don't think that past felons would vote for a girl cop for governor. Jenny Durkin took the deposition of 4 of those individuals, and all 4 had voted for Dino. So I won by 132.
So landslide Gregoire, sorry, I miscounted, 132 votes that she ran. So then, of course, I admire anyone who would run for office. And of course, Faith ran. She was first appointed to the King County Superior Court and a couple times and was reappointed. And then you decided to run for the Supreme Court. And as I recall, you lost that election. And then you picked up and ran again. Now, that takes a lot of guts. Why did you do that?
Well, I have to show you. I have to show you a book that I wrote. It's called "Getting to Justice: From Unwed Mother to State Supreme Court Justice." And I also have with me this book. This book, and this is Citizen Justice, William O. Douglas.
Yeah.
And that was written by her. So anyway, as the book says, secretly, I was an unwed mother when I was in undergraduate school. I went out of state, had my child, gave my child up for adoption, kept it very confidential and secret. And then my daughter and I were reunited when she was 32 years old, because we had both filed for something that they had in Colorado that if 2 people filed to be reunited, they would be. So when I went and told my mother that I was thinking about running again, she says, "Oh, you've just been reunited with your daughter. The press will make something out of that." And I said, "Let them, I've already got the pro-choice vote. Oh, maybe I'll get the pro-life vote." And I said, "But really, it's just your fault. You always said that you follow your dream, and this is my dream." And the reason I had this dream was because there were so many things that were going on that I, on the Superior Court, even as president of the Superior Court Judges Association, couldn't quite get accomplished. Things like you talked about lawyers making passes at you when you were a new lawyer. I wanted that to be a rule that ethics were violated if you messed with your clients or with your associates. And there were some other things that I wanted to be rules, mostly having to do with either gender or race or some issues that were they weren't as embraced in those days as they were until the Trump administration. Anyway, that's the reason why I wanted to run again. I wanted to see those things done, and most of them were things that were accomplished while I was on the Supreme Court, with the exception of eliminating the death penalty, which came 10 years later.
Well, I do want to say, can I tell one story? Before she was on the Supreme Court, of course, she was a King County Superior Court judge. And I had a big trial in front of her. It was a trade secret antitrust trial. And it went a long time, like a couple of months. And it was really inconvenient for me. It was bumping up against my wedding date. But I didn't want to, put that on the table with opposing counsel. So on Friday night, Judge Enyart said, "Well, the trial's gone on way too long. We need to get going. We're going to have jury instructions tomorrow." And I sort of raised my hand and say, "Well, Your Honor, I'm getting married tomorrow and I can't come to jury instructions." And she says, and I have the transcript, "Miss McEwen, is this your first marriage?" Apparently, I answered the right way because I said yes, and so she then adjourned the court until Monday morning. And eventually, you know, the trial went on, it finally ended, and my husband had to leave for the honeymoon in advance, but without me because we were losing reservations and he was researching. But in any event, we concluded that. But I do have that in my wedding scrapbook. So, speaking of women in public office, one of the things you read a lot about now is the Fed, very much in the news. And so some of you may not know, but Judy was actually the chair of the Fed in San Francisco. So would you tell us, what did that entail and what were the kind of big issues? I mean, every issue in front of the Fed is a big issue, but what was that position like? And she said to me, I don't think I deserve to have HON, honorable, in front of my name. And I said, well, we looked it up, and you do. So
I am going to cherish this. I'm going to have it bronzed, honorable.
So
More than
Honorable Judy,
honorable.
would you respond?
It was a fascinating experience. Has anybody else here served on the Seattle branch of the Federal Reserve? Because there are sometimes I see that. Our Federal Reserve is really interesting, and it is unique of all the central banks in the world. And that's why these most recent attacks on the Fed have just given me heartburn. The independence of the Federal Reserve is absolutely critical to our economic well-being. I'll just get on my soapbox right now, and it's been defended ever since 1913, and we need to make sure that it stays independent. But the reason it's unique is because when the Federal Reserve was created, politics was the same then as it is now. You had the hard money versus the soft money. You had the central bank people versus the farmers who didn't want a central bank who didn't trust it. You had gold versus silver, the whole deal. Anyway, so there were a lot of compromises that were reached. And one of them was that, yes, you would have this strong board in Washington, D.C. at the time. Actually, it was New York. But you would have districts around the country, and that these districts would then allow some input from the hinterlands into what what monetary policy should be. And, you know, to give you an idea, when it was set up, it was like that old map. There was New York, and then there was everything west of New York, which there's nothing there. So you have 12 districts, and the 12th district, which was, of course, the last one they thought about, was practically everything west of Dallas. Everything. It's all of California, Oregon, Nevada, Washington, Alaska. It's by far the largest district, by far the most populous, and by far the most important economically. So we had these 12 districts, and within each 12th district, then, there is a board. And that board is composed of people who are either bankers or appointed by bankers. And then there's a group of directors who can't be connected with banks at all. And they are supposed to represent the professions, farmers, labor. It's all laid out in the statute. And the idea was that you would have input coming up from the districts rather than decisions all being made at the Washington, D.C., then the New York level. So you have these boards all over the country, and they meet every month, and then they have the district boards within them. We have a Seattle branch board, and honestly, people get together and they say what is happening on the ground in either their industry or their community. Because, you know, the Federal Reserve has reams of economists, and with all due deference, the only thing they can do is look back. They can only look at data. Whereas when you're on the ground, you can actually see what is happening and you can give real-time input. And it is just fascinating to watch that interplay. I'll never forget when I was chairing, I also got to chair the Conference of the Chairs. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I spent quite a bit of time with Alan Greenspan, who was, you know, Bob Woodward wrote a book about him called The Maestro. He was a master. He could wrap Congress around his little finger. Most of the time, they had no idea what he was talking about. But he was very charming and very plugged into Washington, D.C. But the whole point of it, of this long saga, is that our Federal Reserve serves us because it is not just a function of the politicians in Washington, D.C. Yes, Congress set the rules, and they said the Federal Reserve should promote stability, and it should promote stability of prices, stability of employment, and stability of prices. Hard to do. It's a very, very hard balance, and it requires a lot of work and machinations. If you have the President of the United States telling the Federal Reserve how to set monetary policy, it is a road to disaster. And we saw it in the 1970s. Am I on my soapbox? Yes. We saw it in the 1970s when Nixon tried to tell Burns what to do, and they did nothing, and the interest rates were not set properly. Inflation ran amok, and it wasn't until Volcker came in the early 80s, and he ran interest rates up into the high teens.
Right.
And the country went through a horrible, horrible situation then. And that's when I actually came to Seattle, and Seattle was in the middle of a terrible recession. That was, of course, partly the Boeing recession, but it always comes back to haunt us. So we have to have a Federal Reserve can make independent judgment based on their own experience, yes, the data, but also what they're hearing from around the country. And if we lose that, we're going to be right back in the soup again. Now, we got big problems. We got huge fiscal problems, and I worry about it all the time. You cannot have interest of $1 trillion. You cannot have a GDP, a debt that is 120% of your GDP, and you cannot have a deficit of $2 trillion a year and make this work forever. So I'm very worried about where we're headed, but the Federal Reserve does its very best to try to balance these in this recent battle you saw going on, and I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to tell the president that he cannot fire Lisa Cook. And that has nothing to do with Lisa Cook. It's just the whole principle of the thing. I'm encouraged. I think I have listened to the arguments. I think our U.S. Supreme Court is going to say the independence of the Federal Reserve is critical to the country, and I think they're going to come out on the right side on this. But anyway, I learned a tremendous amount from it. I do believe the Federal Reserve is one of the more important institutions we have, and we have to maintain it.
Well, I think it's incredibly important observation to think about the difference between economists looking back and citizens looking forward in the Federal Reserve Board. I bought a house at 18%, so I was at the other end.
You remember those years?
Yeah, I remember some of that. I do want to mention, I think we first met on the Downtown Seattle Association because they needed a couple women on the board, and they looked around, and there weren't any. Well, there was Judy, and then they chose me. So I want to ask you, because you've been on every do-good or undo-good committee that there ever has been in Washington State and Seattle, and you've really been a citizen lawyer, whether it's the Seattle Symphony or the Downtown Seattle Association or these Safeco board, corporate board. How did you juggle all that with a law practice?
Well, you ask somebody that's really busy to do something, and they just get more done. I worked very, very hard, and I spent weekends pouring through all sorts of reports and whatever. But, I grew up in a tiny, tiny little town, and I could not wait to get to Seattle or a bigger town. Actually, it wouldn't have taken much. I could have gone to Boise, Idaho, and that would have been a really big city. So when I got to Seattle, I was determined to be involved with it, to be engaged. I saw what an incredible place it was, and I could see its natural beauty, but I could also see that there were lots of things that needed doing downtown. You just have to be engaged. And those of you who are here, I know it is much more demanding to practice law in a private firm than it was then. I mean, the pressure with regard to billable hours and everything else is tremendous. But you've got to, in some small way, be engaged. You've got to keep involved with your community. You just have to be in some sort of position where you're helping. So many organizations now that you can plug into. And when I came to Seattle, it was the Chamber of Commerce, which had no women, or the Downtown Seattle Association, which had maybe one or two. And that was it. Now there are many, yeah, that was us. But now there are so many different ways to plug in, and I would just encourage, hard as it is, to try to be involved. And this city and this region needs you, because a lot of people are just tuning out. I don't know whether it was COVID, whether it's the work from home, or maybe it's just the sort of, the nastiness that goes on social media. So a lot of people just tune out. But a way to avoid that is getting involved personally. You don't have to worry about social media. You get to know people, you meet people, the connections you make, the connection you and I make, the connection that we made, Chris, all those years ago. It so enriches your life. So make time, work hard.
Well, we've seen there's no straight line, and certainly you never had a straight line career. As you wonder, well, what do you do after you're the governor? I know you're with Challenge Seattle, so one of the things, if you would just comment briefly, and I hope we'll have some time to have questions, is how do you shape a career but be open to changing course?
So can I make one pitch?
Yes.
I think the United States Congress, the Washington State Legislature, are challenged in part because there aren't enough lawyers. I may be in the minority who thinks that, but I am right. So I'm all in with what Judy just said about getting engaged and getting involved. If you're not willing to run for office, then who? And I'm sorry, you're the best and the brightest. That's who we need. So if I can just make that pitch. And yeah, I know it isn't the most popular thing to do now, and I get all that. But only you can make the right kinds of changes that will make the public feel good again about where we're headed, what we're doing, who we are, proud of this country, proud of this state. So if I could just make that little pitch, and if you'd like to talk more, I am happy to talk more. Now, back to how did I get where I got? I didn't plan my career. So when you said, did I have something in mind? I did not. I really fundamentally believed, I guess, looking back, that whatever job I had, and my first job out of college, because I had a teaching certificate and there weren't any jobs, was a clerk typist 2. Notice the 2, not just a 1. I was a 2. Did I type well? No, I did not, but that's okay. But the point being, I worked as hard as I possibly could in that job. And I wasn't looking for the next, and the door opened. And I chose the door to walk through. I worked as hard as I could on that next job, and a door opened, and I walked through. So I think that all of us here would tell you that we worked as hard as the next person or harder. Now, we have 2 daughters. I did not influence this, but they're both lawyers. But 2 daughters, and I want you to know that family is absolutely first in my head. As evidence of that, when I was in the governor's office, my phone, only 3 people knew the telephone number, my 2 daughters and my husband. If it went off, didn't matter who I was meeting with, they knew I would answer that call. So family first. But when not family, I tell you, hard work, sometimes people don't think this, pays off. And always doing your best at what you're doing right then and letting that door open, take that choice, walk through that door and get the next shot. So I never thought I'm a daughter, yeah, I know you're going to say only child, but anyway, the daughter of a single mom who was a short order cook. And do you think I ever thought I'd be governor of the great state of Washington? Thought never crossed my mind. But I look back and say, Mom was right. There are 3 priorities in life: education, education, education. They can't take that away. And if you work hard, the doors were open and you can live your dream and do whatever you want to do.
So she jumped ahead. You really answered my last question, which I'm going to let Faith and Judy also talk about, and that is, what advice would you give to your younger self? She just laid out an amazing roadmap. So additional comments?
How would you top that?
Well, I don't think you do, except the education part is really significant to me because when I was in the 8th grade, I was told that I was not college material. So I was told to take shorthand, which I did, and I was very bad at. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, I was babysitting for my state senator, and I was working on his campaign stuff when the kids were outside. And he said, "What are your plans for college?" And I said, "Well, I'm not planning for college because I'm not college material." He said, "Nonsense! You will be doing your prerequisites immediately." And of course, the rest is history. Three degrees later, my undergrad, law school, and a master's in tax.
No? Well, I will say when I arrived at Perkins Coie, I asked for a typewriter, and they said, lawyers don't type. I said, but I can type, and I'm sure I can type faster than I can dictate, which I don't know if that was true. But fast forward, computers came, and seemed like none of the male lawyers could type,
They were like
except
this.
somebody that I had worked with had been a court reporter in the Army, and we could type, and so we kind of ushered in the computer age. So with that, I want you to now see if we have a few questions from the audience. Is that fine, Cynthia? And then we'll wrap it up. So any questions? Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's been very inspiring hearing all of your stories. I have to say thank you so much. You all are came of age as lawyers in an era when Bader Ginsburg was really charting revolutionary strategy for challenging the way society and the law exchanges between men and women. And I'm wondering whether, as young lawyers, you were aware of that, whether you followed that, like what, it's easy to look back at the hagiography of Justice Ginsburg and look at the impact that she had. As contemporaries almost of the changes that she was reaching, what did you think about it at the time, if anything?
Any comments?
Well, I would just say, at least from my perspective, I was unaware of it.
Yeah,
I was just out there slogging it, just trying to get my job done, trying to get my clients' projects approved. And I was really unaware of what was going on. The only thing I knew was that Wade versus Roe had been decided in 1972, yay, and I just was not tracking the legal side of it. I was just toughing it out there every day. So it's only later on in my career that I look back and I say, wow, look at what those women were doing. And I read several books on what Justice Justice Sandra Day O'Connor did, and how sad it is that we lost her off the court because she really was that centrist. But the only job she could get was as a secretary.
Right.
So it's later in life that I now realize what they were doing and what they were carving out for us. I guess what we were maybe carving out for was by example. We were showing that women could do the job, but we weren't doing it, I guess, in a legal way per se. We were just doing it by example.
Yeah.
Well, say Justice O'Connor had a little pillow in her chamber, said, often wrong but never in doubt, which kind of echoes what Chris was saying. I was fortunate in law school. I took a class in sex discrimination. There were no books, so I wondered, what am I going to do? Someone said, why don't you get in touch with this lady called Ruth Ginsburg? She's a professor. So over the transom, I wrote her a note. And here's the important thing is she answered my note.
Wow.
And later on, after meeting her at the Ninth Circuit Judicial Conference and becoming a judge, I had the great fortune to be a very good friend of hers. And I reminded her one day in the ladies' bathroom, I said, you may not remember, but you reached out when I was nobody. I was a law student who asked for your help. And I thought that was really emblematic of who she is, who she was. And
Wow,
we've
what a
lost some of
story.
that. Another question? And yes.
I would like to hear about if you have one particular or various most meaningful moments in your career, other accomplishments or just moments.
Chris?
In the practice of law,
Or as a governor.
well, you know what? So when you get the privilege of being governor, you get the privilege of doing some really good things. I look back and say, thank God Washington State led on marriage equality. But I will tell you one thing that has really always touched my heart. When I was an assistant attorney general in Spokane, I did child dependency termination work. And there was this one child who had been really very much abused as a baby. Went to live with the foster parents, and it was a couple who ultimately adopted the child. At that point, I can have no more contact. So I never knew anything about what happened until I became Attorney General. And the mom wrote me a note in which she simply said, I want you to know what you did. Our daughter just graduated from undergraduate school. She's going to law school because she wants to be just like you. And the lesson that taught me is you can make the difference in one life that is worth an entire career. So while I'm very proud of many things that I was given the chance to do, that one is the one that really I look back and say, that taught me that making a difference with one child is, to me, a whole career.
Wow.
Oh, I'm going to pass on that one. I think I'll let somebody
I just have one, and it was not practicing law. I was chairing the United Way campaign in 1988, and it was the year that the Catholic Church and the Planned Parenthood got in a huge battle in Seattle, and they were both United Way agencies, and it was the most hellish thing I have ever been through because we were supposed to raise $36 million. I was the first woman chair of the United Way campaign to get caught in a battle over abortion. There was something anyway, I'd been to all these agencies. I saw all the good work they were doing. We were supposed to raise $36 million, and it looked like we were only going to raise $15 million. And I could just see what was going to happen to the budget of all these agencies, and it was horrible. But I did go to a number of the CEOs in the community, and once again, they pulled through, and they stood by me, and they said, even if our campaigns falter, we will make corporate contributions, and we'll get you up to your 30. We ended up making $35 million. But, yeah, I think
Yeah. Well,
special.
I'll just close with one of my stories that really echoes Chris's, and that was when I was a lawyer here at Perkins, I took a lot of pro bono work, which later seemed to have gotten me in trouble during my confirmation. Who would have thought? But I had a client named Earl. He was a World War II veteran. He had a lot of issues. He had a lot of issues with the VA. He had a lot of issues with Social Security. He had insecurity, both where he lived, income, and everything else. And he really needed a social worker more than he needed a lawyer. But I saw that there was some avenues to maybe help Earl. But he used to come to our lobby all the time because he didn't have anywhere else to go. And people would say, well, Earl's out there. And usually I'd come out and say hello. And a lot of times, I might be actually busy working on something else. But we were able, and I was able to work with Earl over a number of years. And one day they said, Earl's in the lobby, and I said, I'll be out shortly, but I have to finish up something. And I came out, and Earl wasn't there. But he had left me in a liquor box, a kind of a mildewed quilt, which he wrote me a note, and he said his aunt had made this quilt, and he wanted me to have it. And he said, thank you for everything. I never saw Earl again. But I still remember Earl, and I think all of us can make a difference. So join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.